She does that because she knows I don't like her to. Well, there's a sense of the presence of God here tonight. When we were worshipping, you might have noticed, although you should have had your eyes closed, that I just whispered in, who's that man? Emmanuel's ear. Just said, something's happening, Emmanuel, just go with it. And then, who are you again? Sandra. Sandra really picked that up and so on. And there's a presence of God in the house tonight. And just in those last few moments before I got up to speak, I just felt I just need to talk about that for a moment. The facts of the matter are that God is always present. Theologically, He's always here. The theological concept is called omnipresence. Omni means all, and present, of course, means here. So He's all present. It's not like us. Like Marilyn, you would like to tell me that you're here right now, but I can prove that you're not. Well,
am I here or am I not here?
okay. Are you in China?
I'm not in China.
Are you in Africa?
I'm not in Africa.
Are you in Port Adelaide?
I love Port Adelaide.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But are you there?
I'm not there, no, I'm
Okay.
here.
So if you're not there, you must be somewhere else.
And that somewhere else is here.
If you're somewhere else, you can't be here.
No, I'm not somewhere else.
The silly little exercise is to demonstrate that Marilyn cannot be everywhere at the same time. But God can. It's a simple thing for God. You might say, I find that hard to believe. Well, you try to make your kids believe in that little guy that races around the world at the end of the year and make out that he can be everywhere in one evening. But God can. And, you know, the facts are, I've been in other countries and been in touch with Australia and heard that at the same time we were worshipping God, they were worshipping God, and He happened to be in both places. So He can be everywhere at the same time. So the presence of God is here is in many ways a superfluous statement, because you cannot go anywhere on the face of the earth or anywhere in the universe and He's not there. David said, if I make my bed in hell, you are there. Now, I find that a little bit inconceivable. Maybe if we dug into that theologically, we would discover exactly what that means. But the facts are, David, the psalmist, said you cannot go anywhere without knowing that God is there. And so, to say the presence of God was here tonight, as I said, is a little superfluous. Is that the right word to use there? Because it's a stated fact. Well, it's not a stated fact, it's a fact. Fait accompli, I think, is the word that gets used sometimes, but we're not French, so it's just a fact. So, what happens when some silly pastor gets up and says, I feel the presence of God here? Well, what has happened is that the spiritual sensors of that person have experienced and sensed that God is here. This morning, Senator David Fawcett was reversing out of a car parking spot, and I was sure he was going to hit those garden boxes. I was sure he was. And we've been able to, thank God, we've been able to go for a couple of years now, Les, without any damage to those boxes, because they were getting hit every week. And we'd fix them and they'd get hit again. And I didn't realise he had his window down, and I'm going, David, David, David. And he said, it's okay, my sensors are beeping at me. Something in the car has let him know the wall is getting close. There's something in your spirit, let's call it a spiritual sensor, that lets you know that God is here. So it's not so much, is God here or isn't He? It's, are your sensors working? And the beauty of this thing is that you can actually train your senses to sense the presence of God. And so you can cynically say, what's he up to? Reckons the presence of God is here. I can't feel anything. You can do that if you like. And you're probably quite right. You can't feel the presence of God because, your spirit doesn't respond in a sense of cynicism. So you can dismiss that and prove us to be correct by walking out and saying, I never felt a thing, and they were saying there was, you can do that if you like. But you have to ask yourself, was God there or not? Well, yeah, theologically God is there. So is it possible that somebody can feel the presence of God in one way or another while others don't? Absolutely. Absolutely. Is it possible that one person can feel the presence of God in one way and another person either doesn't or feels it in a different way? Absolutely. It is possible. It's factual. For years we've seen in Pentecostal circles this phenomena of when people are prayed for that they fall down. We go through phases of that happening. There are times when it's kind of like that game, Oranges and Lemons. We all fall down. It's kind of like everybody's down, and then there's other times when it's one or two people that get affected by whatever it is, and they go down. And I regretfully say, because I'm a fairly honest person, we've made our mistakes as Pentecostals, and forgive me, but so have all the other churches. But we've all made our mistakes, and I regretfully say that there have been times when, it's almost a badge of honour that you either fell down or you got someone to fall down. Wow, did you see that when I prayed for people, everybody fell down? Or, wow, I've fallen down 25 times in one service. Well, that's great. We're not going for Guinness records here. But I regretfully say that we have gone that way, but for me, it's not something I experience. I've fallen over. I've been a Christian now for 59 years. I was saved before I was born. No. When it says you must be born again, to me, it was my natural birth. No, that's not true. I've been saved and in church. I've been in church all my life, in Pentecostal church all my life. I've seen most of what's going to happen. I wouldn't say all because God's going to surprise me with something. But I am not the kind of person that falls over, as we say, under the power of God. Do I sense the presence of God? Absolutely. Do I feel it in a tangible way? Without question. But do I fall over? No. So I became a little bit of a trophy to some. If you can get Newsham down, that's true. It was across the nation. Paul, am I right? I can see you nodding. You know this is a fact. If you can get Newsham down, you must be doing well. And they've done everything but kneel behind me and push. And so I go into a meeting where people are, ooh, the presence of God is here, and I don't have a lot of these emotional feelings or physical feelings so much, but I've learned that you don't have to have a physical or even emotional feeling, but your spirit can reach out and sense and understand. And so we were in a meeting with Rodney Howard-Brown, I think, in Brisbane. And Rodney's ministry is having this incredible phenomena of people falling over and all sorts of things happening. And this would be back in the late 90s, I think. Maybe a bit later than that even, I'm not sure. But he called all the pastors up for prayer, so I went up for prayer, and he had laid hands on another pastor who was then going along praying for people, and they were falling down like a machine gun was hitting them. And Rodney was just walking along behind this guy, just walking along, doing almost nothing, and just occasionally would stop and pray in front of someone and move on. And so everybody goes boom, 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 down, and here's Newsham, just standing there, and it goes boom, 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 boom. And he came and he just incredibly gently touched my chest like that. And I just felt myself start to sway, and I fell over under the presence of God and couldn't get up for some time. And then I don't know, later than that, we went to Argentina on our way to Bolivia. And we went into a little Baptist church. I reckon it would seat about 200 at a push. And it was mostly blue rinse generation. The first 5 to 6 rows were all elderly people. And the meeting was cooking, let me tell you. It was cooking, wasn't it, Lorraine? I don't know if I've been in anything quite so like it. And all these little old ladies bobbing up and down, and guys more lively than our youth, which, yeah. And, it was just amazing. And this guy came on stage who I decided he was the guest speaker of the meeting. But I felt he was the guest speaker but known. It'd be a little bit like a Dave McCracken, a Kevin Forlong, a Jeff Crabtree, one of those guys coming to our church who most of us have known over a period of time, and so we love and know their ministry. And he came on came across the platform and began to pray for different people on the platform, like drummers and musicians, guitarists. And the reason I said drummers and musicians is because apparently drummers aren't musicians. And they're all going crash, bang, crash. You know, the drummer went through the drums, and the guitarist is kind of lying on his back playing, and the singers have fallen over, and some have fallen over him. And I said to him, if he keeps this going, worship's over. It was incredible. Then they asked me to come. Were you with Helen in Bolivia? He asked me to come up and bring a greeting to the pastor of the church. And I'd never met the pastor, but he asked us to come up and bring a greeting. And I walked up onto the stage on the steps on that side. The moment I hit the stage, it was like the stage was up to here in treacle. And I just could hardly move. And I walked like this kind of, and I got to the pulpit, and I stood hanging onto the pulpit because I was swaying as if I'd had one too many. Now, I've never had one, let alone one too many, I'm a teetotaler, they call us, and I'm swaying like crazy. I just didn't know what hit me. You can be cynical about all this stuff. But you see, something's happening in my spirit. So then I finally got back off the platform and kind of wobbled back to my seat. If they had a white line on the floor, I'm not walking it, I can tell you. And fortunately, we had a designated driver. I walked back to my seat, and then they called there was 13 of us there from Australia, and they called all the kangaroos up, they said. Can all the kangaroos come? We're going to pray for you. So we lined up across the front. And, well, there's 2 rows of us, that's right. Lorraine and I were the second row. Yeah, we were the second row, and there was a row in front of us. And they began to pray, and people began to... And this little character, I don't know, to my memory, I might be wrong, he's just a little guy with curly hair, and somebody might know the man and therefore tell me I'm wrong. But he kind of ducked under... I don't think he prayed for anyone. He kind of ducked under the first row, came up in front of us, and he laid hands on Laureen, and she hit the deck and started to sob. And I'm thinking, wow, this is different, because normally when she goes down, she laughs and shuts the whole meeting down. But she started to sob. And then he stepped aside next to me, and he laid hands on me, and I just went down, crash. And I wonder what in the world hit me, and I was down there for ages under the power of God. It was a life-changing experience. I asked somebody later who that man was that prayed for us, and his name was Carlos Anaconda. I always say his name wrong. Carlos Anaconda, who is referred to as the Billy Graham of South America, who is an amazing evangelist. He'll go into a stadium, he'll walk into a stadium, and nobody actually knows he's walked in. And within a moment of walking in a 60,000 seat auditorium that's jam-packed, suddenly there'll be people screaming as demons come out of them, and people are overpowered by the Spirit of God. And this man had laid hands on us. And I had no idea who he was until I asked who it was. But there was something about our spirit that night that sensed God was moving, and we received it and experienced it. And I want to encourage you tonight to learn to tune your spirit. Now, the first thing to tuning your spirit is getting to know God. If you are not in a relationship with God, then the chances are your spirit is not going to know when to respond or how to respond. It's not going to know that God is there. You've got to tune your spirit, and the first step is to get into a relationship with God. And so if you don't know Jesus, if you've never invited Jesus Christ into your life, then that's the starting point. I know there are people who don't know God that have experienced His presence. I know some people who have walked into even this church and sat down and began to sob. They don't know what's causing it. And they'll say, some of them, I'm not an emotional person, but the moment I walked in, I just began to sob. That's because the presence of God has overpowered them, though they can't explain what it is. But that isn't always the case, and it's a risk to take. I won't get to know God, but if He wants to touch me, He can. When I met Laureen, I didn't sense what she sensed. She fell in love at first sight. I didn't sense that, but as I got to know her, I began to realize I wanted to be in her presence. I wanted to get to know her. I wanted to be with her. And she very sillily didn't get out of the way, and so she got stuck with me now for 44 years nearly. But it was because as I got to know her, I wanted to know her presence. I wanted to experience her. I wanted to be with her. And so it's a risk. If I had have stood back and said, well, I'll wait till she puts salt in my wheat bix, which she did, by the way. But if I wait until she reaches out to me, it may not happen in the sense that I might not know to respond or how to respond. So if you wait for God, who wants to speak to you, who is here right now, who wants to change your life, if you wait for Him to reach out to you, it may not happen. And you might say that is grossly unfair. And I might say to you, but hang on, you've already heard tonight, Jesus Christ went to the cross and died for you. How much more do you expect Him to do? Sorry, I got passionate, but I felt very passionate. Because people say that. I'll wait till God reaches out to me. Effectively, God has done everything possible to reach out to you. It's your job to respond to Him now. So get to know Him. The second thing is get to know Him. But you already said that. I know. But you see, there's lots of people that I know, but I need to get to know them. Do you know what I mean? You know. You see, I know lots of you people in this building, but I don't know all of you as well as I would Steve Backer or Paul Boxall. You've got two mentions tonight. I don't know you all like I know those people, because we have got to know one another. And it's one thing to know somebody, it's another thing to know somebody. I think it'd be true to say Reese has been in the church now, 2 years? Reese has been in the church for about 2 years, and I've known Reese, and we've chatted and done stuff together, but it's only in the last 3.5 months that I've got to know Reese. And I said to Reese tonight, I'm really glad you're on team here, because you're like us, you're weird. But I've got to know her. I probably couldn't have said that to her a few months ago, even though I might have thought it, because I didn't know her well enough to be able to say that to her and for her to understand what I mean. But I've got to know Reese and got to appreciate some things about her that I'd never seen at a surface knowledge. Do you know what I'm saying? And God is like that. You see, God is so deep. There is so much about God. There is so much depth in God, breadth, width, height in God, that until you get to know Him, you won't know Him. In fact, the truth of the matter is, I want to get to know God, and I've started on that journey many years ago, and I still don't know Him, and I'm going to be going for eternity, and I'll guarantee at the day before eternity ends, which is impossible, but that day, such a long way off, He's going to pull something out to reveal Him to me that I didn't know about Him. Because there's so much to know about Him. You might think, this whole God thing's boring. Let me tell you, you start digging in. Nothing boring about God. If you were digging for gold, it's going to be boring for quite a long time. But eventually you're going to hit something. And it's going to excite you so much that you'll run all the way to the assayer's office, and then you'll start running all the way to the bank, because you've discovered something in the midst of the boring activity that has excited you. And if you will learn to dig into God, get to know Him, to really know Him, if you will do that, it's going to change your life. And you're going to find that God is not a boring thing. You see, it doesn't matter where I go to church anymore. It matters that I go. Don't anyone misinterpret me. This business of I'm a Christian but I don't go to church, I don't believe that's anywhere near biblical. Don't try that on me. It's not biblical. God works through the church. That's not a self-protective statement. That's a fact of the Word of God. So it doesn't matter where I go to church anymore. I can experience God in that place. So I went to a Catholic church many years ago. I'd never been to a Catholic church, and I thought, I'm going to go and just see what they do because I've heard stuff, I want to see it. So I went along to a Catholic church, and quite frankly, and I don't mean to be offensive, but after you've been in a church like this, that's pretty sort of tame. Yeah, that's a good word. But different's a better word. That's a diplomatic word, Will, a very diplomatic word. I'm getting to know you better. That was very diplomatic. But you know what? I'm sitting there thinking, I don't know when to stand, I don't know when to sit. But that's the same for people who come here. I don't know when to stand, I don't know when to sit, I don't know where to say hail or whatever else it is they say. I don't know how many beads to count. I don't know all of this stuff. I didn't know everybody suddenly up the front having communion. I didn't know what they were doing up there. They didn't tell us to come up there and get it. Everybody just turned up at the front. So I didn't know all that stuff. I went up to receive communion, and the priest told me later he shouldn't have even given me communion. But he did it so as not to embarrass me. So I didn't know what was going on. It was I don't understand Latin. So it was a struggle for me. But I said, God, you're in this place. And I experienced God there in that place because I decided to dig in. And if you want your senses to beep when you're about to hit God, then you need to start to dig in a bit and get to know what God is all about, who He is, what He is. Was Tim here last Sunday night? Or was it morning? He was here at night. Last Sunday night, if you were here, my son Timothy preached. I heard he did well. Is that right, Carly? And he preached about what about the Bible? How to read the Bible is what he told me, and I heard that you had commented on the difference in the style of preaching to normal or whatever, and I took it as an insult. That's fine. But he talked about how to read the Bible. If you weren't here, or you were and you didn't grasp it all, you need to get a copy of that. And because one of the best ways to get to know God is to read the Scriptures. I've been stunned this year, having read through the Bible every year for 7 years. Every day I read a portion of the Bible that gets me through. I read the entire Bible in every year, and I've done that for 7 years, plus all the years of reading that I've done prior. And yet this year, I have seen stuff in the Scriptures that has blown my mind. I've been on a very deliberate search this year for the God of love in the Old Testament because it seems at a surface level that He's very hard to find, the God of love in the Old Testament. I have been stunned as I've stumbled over gold in the Old Testament, the love of God. You want to get to know God? Read His love letter to you. That's what it is. Oh, that stuffy book. No. It's His love letter to you. You need to read it and read it and read it. We've been over this before. I don't have time. Don't tell me that. I can find the time in your diary if you'll just give me an opportunity. I'll guarantee it. You need to talk to Him. So He doesn't answer you back? Well, you're rude enough to do that to Him sometimes. Do you know that God's talking to you regularly and you don't necessarily answer Him? So when you say He doesn't answer back, it could be more likely that we haven't learned to understand. We haven't got our senses on so that we understand when He's speaking to us. It's like my children. Laureen would say to my kids, "Would you please come and help with the dishes?" And they wouldn't move. And so I, sitting even closer to them than she would be at the time, would say, "Do you want a lolly?" Up like that. And they'd come running in, "Where's my lolly? You're not getting one." "But you said I get..." "No." I said, "Do you want one?" You've got to be careful of what you say and what they hear. I said, "No, I said, do you want one?" Yeah, we want one." I said, "Well, go and help with the dishes." "How come?" "Your mother called you loudly to come and help with the dishes, and you took no notice, but you heard when I whispered, 'Do you want a lolly?' So don't tell me you didn't hear your mother." So whether God's yelling or whispering, you can hear it if you choose to, if you train yourself to. There are many ways in which God speaks. I don't have time for that tonight, unless you're happy to stay late, very late. But there are many ways in which we can hear the voice of God to us. And it's a case of learning how to do that. And until you deliberately decide that I am going to learn to hear the voice of God, you won't hear it. Except for those odd occasions when God kind of does the slap therapy, which he does on occasions. You find on occasions God saying, "Abraham, Abraham," instead of "Moses," because it's a really urgent situation and he needs to get his attention. And some of us are so thick that even if God yelled at us, we possibly wouldn't take notice. But we have to learn to understand the voice of God so that we can respond when he speaks. To say that he doesn't hear would be incorrect. He hears everything you pray. To say that he doesn't respond could well be correct, because there are times when he doesn't. Just as you, after telling your children no 5 times, if you're smart, you shouldn't have got up to 5, but if you're smart, the next time they ask, you ignore them. Or you say, "I've told you one answer 5 times. If you don't hear that, you're not going to hear it again." And so there are times when God doesn't answer. There are other times when God says, "Now's not the time. I'll get to you soon." Because, of course, we're so impatient. It needs to happen now. Isn't that right? I want my supper and I want it now. That's the way we live our lives. God says, "You know what? You'd be far better to wait for a while. The coffee's awfully hot. Drink it a little bit later." There are times when he withholds or delays. The delays of God are not a refusal. They're just smart. Laureen's just dropped off to sleep for a moment. I was dating a girl and praying that the Lord would work out whether or not I should marry her, and I was fairly well convinced that this was right and that it, blah, 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 blah. And God actually told me, "Break it off." And and so we broke it off, and 15 minutes later convinced ourselves that we'd done the Abraham-Isaac thing. We'd been willing to give up, and so because we were willing to give it up, God would now permit us to go back together again. And a whole lot of other stuff happened, and eventually it broke up, and I'm devastated and heartbroken, and this is awful that this has happened. But you know what? I look back now over nearly 44 years of marriage, and I say, thank God that you didn't answer that prayer back there. Because I'm telling you, she wasn't the right person for me. She would have destroyed me. I'm so sensitive. She would have destroyed me. But God had a better plan. And the fact that he didn't, I'm glad you think so. And the fact that he didn't answer me, I could have said, "You ignorant God, why didn't you speak to me?" But I'm just jolly glad that he did not answer that prayer. So we need to dig in. We need to dig in. You need to get to know God. You know, there are people that would come to, say, this church or some other situation where I would be, and they would decide the kind of person I am. They would decide, you know, I remember a lady coming into a meeting. I was preaching in Dandenong. I don't know if you were with me. I think you would have been, because I think we did a marriage seminar there. But on the Sunday, I was sitting up the front. I was just sitting there, but she walked in and she told me later on, she said, when I first walked in, first time in the church, she walked in, she said, when I first walked in, I saw the drummer. She said, "I hate drums." And then she said, you got up to speak, and I looked at you and I thought, if I have to sit and listen to him all morning, this is going to be dreadful. So she's looked from a distance and formed an opinion. But she said, after you'd been speaking for a few minutes, you started to get through to me. And I was really blessed. You were not a Christian, so she probably didn't use those words, but I'm saying the words. I was really blessed by what you shared. What had happened was she had judged me at a surface level. But after she sat there for a while and tuned in, began to realize that I'm not what she judged me to be. See, back in those days, I hardly ever cracked a smile. Was I funny? I tried to be. I thought I was, and a couple of people thought I was. My wife would laugh because that's what you're supposed to do. But no, I still had a sense of humour, and I enjoyed life, and I was a happy person. But I had, because of circumstances and because I thought it was smart, had trained myself not to smile. Even now, today, Laureen will sit on the front row occasionally, go like that, to tell me to smile because I need to soften up my face. But I was, if you watch my son Timothy, you'll see the same characteristic. Tim, we used to have to do every trick in the book to get him to smile for a photograph. But so you see this grim, stern face, and you think that's a grim, stern person, but you're judging on the surface. Let me tell you, I don't know what you've seen of God. But if you don't love God after having seen something of him, then I'm sorry, but you've judged him by the wrong appearance. Sorry, but you have. Because when you actually see God, and I don't mean necessarily with your physical eyes, but when you actually see God, you can't help but love and adore him. Because though there are stern moments, he's an absolutely magnificent person. It would surprise you to know that my daughter was asked, who would you prefer to be told off by? No, they said, sorry, some of her friends said to her, we would prefer to be told off by your mother than by your father. And there was all the obvious reasons why that was the case. And Michelle looked and laughed. She said, you've got to be joking. I would much prefer my dad to tell me off than my mum. And I think it was something along the lines with dad, it's one big flashbang. With mum, it can go on for a while. Okay, that was my interpretation. But for some reason, everybody else judged that I was the harder when I came to discipline. And yet, my children apparently unanimously agree that, yeah, I'm in a hole. I don't know whether to stop digging or keep going. But it was a misjudgment. And you may have met the harsh God on an occasion, but go back and ask yourself, did you deserve that? Or you may have had a harsh experience in your life and blame God for it. You need to go back and ask yourself, was it God? Because it may not have been. The God I know and have known for 58 years is a God of incredible love. Yes, he spanks me every now and again, and you ought to be very grateful that he does that to me. But is he a harsh God? Not at all. He's a very, very loving God. And everything he does is for my benefit and the extension of his kingdom. So there's just a few things. What I'm trying to say to you, this is not what I had planned to do tonight at all. But what I'm trying to say to you is that God wants to interact with you. And when you hear someone say, oh, I felt the presence of God, instead of being cynical about it, why don't you talk to that person or somebody else about exactly how that happened, what happened, what caused it. Learn to understand about the sense of the presence of God. Because I tell you, when you meet God, when you experience him, when you feel his presence in any way, shape or form, it's a life changer. It is an absolute life changer. I probably didn't quote much of the Bible tonight. You might go out and say, that wasn't a sermon. I'm telling you, think about it. It could change your life forever. And next time you're in a service, and somebody gets up here and in your terms arrogantly says, "Oh, I feel the presence of God," instead of cynically rejecting that as somebody up front trying to whip up the crowd, why don't you say, "Wow, if that person feels that, then maybe something's happening here that I'm not aware of and that I'd love to experience." We'd love you to experience it too. Can we do Worthy of It All again?